morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Pitch Camp series. This is our fourth webinar on the Sales for Entrepreneur series that we have put together. Our idea is to build, a sales content for entrepreneurs with over 12 series events. So today we have Nilesh Patel, CEO from Lead Squared. Welcome, Nilesh.
Hey, hi. Thank you, Bimlesh, for inviting me, and hello, everybody. So before we start, and I think as people join, maybe we can ask some questions to the audience. How many people have sold deals in April and May? And maybe you can tell us about what those deals are.
Great idea, Nilesh.
You can do a chat. Maybe you can just add, and maybe Bimlesh we can read out. I think it'll be good to know in these tough times who's selling.
So Santosh Shukla from F1 Studio said, we are a UX design consulting firm. We continue to sell.
Okay, that's good. Very good.
Yeah.
So I think then the next question is, who's the buyer? Like, which segment is buying? Well, ultimately, see, here's the secret, right? If you know who's buying, then your outcome probability goes up.
Right.
So I think a lot of times that's the tough part to figure out who's in the buying mode right now.
So he says banks,
looks like banks are buying,
SaaS.
which I think I tend to agree. B2B SaaS should buy, right? That's a good one. Diagnostic center should buy. They're making money right now, so that's positive. Educational international travel programs. This one is a tough one to pull off here. How did you do it?
Alpana mentioned that they were able to sell till March, and post that it's on hold. So welcome, Nilesh, once again. I'm very excited to have you on our fourth webinar, and appreciate your support. Pitch Camp is a small initiative with a large ambition that we want to enable founders, to acquire sales skills and build very strong sales organizations, so that our entire startup ecosystem, can make larger progress, to the world and to our nation's economy. So today we are offering, sales coaching programs for entrepreneurs through short activities and 12-week boot camps, and we also help them in their pitching activities as well, right? So that's a small brief of Pitch Camp, and so I've known Nilesh for last 5-6 years, during right from the time they started Lead Squared. Very interesting story there. I actually sent out an inbound lead to Lead Squared in the very initial days, and that's how we started talking to Nilesh. And Nilesh was the first responder within the team to revert back, and that's how we got connected. And we've been in touch since then as entrepreneurs in the ecosystem. So Nilesh, would love to have a brief introduction of yours and talk to us about your life after Proteans. This is your second startup. You're a serial entrepreneur, very successful in this space. You sold out Proteans, which is an outsourced product development company, and then you moved into SaaS when SaaS was very nascent in its world. So just talk us through that through that process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bimlesh, for inviting me to the show. Really appreciate it, and I'm glad you are taking initiative to drive the sales push in the ecosystem of entrepreneurs. I think it's a much needed skill, and in an area where a lot of people with good products can potentially win if they get this right. So I think that's certainly a solid initiative. I've always thought about doing it, but obviously thinking and doing is very, very different. But coming to the question on a bit about my background. So I started my career with IBM. That was in '99, and then I was a programmer there. And then we, couple of our good friends, we started Proteans, as you described, in 2003. It was outsourced product development firm. We exited that in 2010, and in around 11 mid or sometime June, we started the journey for this business. So initially we were toying with some ideas on what to do, right? I mean, we didn't get an idea overnight like most like a lot of other entrepreneurs who suddenly spot an idea. I mean, it took us a bit time. The first year we were doing consulting and services. primarily for sales consulting, because trying to share our experience with other companies. And so that took us about a year and a half. We were doing that, and in middle we spotted some opportunity, and the goal was clear from the beginning that it will be a software-led model, meaning you have to get paid for the software, because you've done services, and I don't know, there's always an H in services. Person who has done services that they want to do software later, right? I mean, it's just
Right.
I think that's just how it works, maybe.
Yeah,
And right?
you're right. Love for cash flow there.
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely SaaS has a decent. The good thing is the cash is always there, as long as you don't get hit by COVID and your business is directly, sort of serving some sectors which are impacted. Other than that, I think largely you should be all right if you're in that space. So that I think when we started, SaaS has already grown. I mean, I think now it is really peaking, or I would say still accelerating. But I think it was definitely not very early days, because there were companies who were already getting sold, in at that time for a few $100 million, or Eloqua got listed, Marketo got listed, so all of that, HubSpot got listed obviously later. So a lot of that was happening. There was action. So we started with a concept of marketing technology, marketing automation in those days. And as we started selling that product, we came across the opportunity on the sales side, which seemed like a bigger opportunity, and where the differentiation we can create could be more solid. So steadily we moved to selling, building the sales product, and today we are. We're one of the top providers in at least India for the suite we offer in the high velocity sales segment. So there we have been able to do reasonably well, I would say, in India, and obviously ambitions to grow further and beyond. So that's the story. I mean, in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Nilesh. Gives that perspective of that you started marketing automation software, especially in SaaS, when SaaS was new and marketing automation was also new, and a lot of hard manual activities used to take place in bringing digital marketing into foray. So So when you started out, you came from an inside sales background. You set up the entire inside sales organization within within Proteons. And so talk to us about your initial strategies and initial activities that worked. During the early days of Lead Squared, you had a single product, marketing automation. So how did you go about sales and customer acquisition?
So I think obviously every entrepreneur who in the SaaS world first hits the Google AdWords, and that's one channel people source the leads. And that was obviously, we also did the same to start with, but slowly but steadily we started doing outbound as well. So we picked potential customers and started outreaching to those guys, and started selling, creating interest by doing so. So it was a mix of both. Initially it was largely inbound, but later we made it outbound as well. And that the key, I would say, is the first thing. I think a first thing one should be doing when they are sort of coming out with a product. It's obviously there are different stages in the life of a company, but let's say you're early in the days. I think what's more important is having the conversations with the potential customers, because conversations really is like a ad hoc market research, right? You keep talking to people, they'll give you ideas, they'll give you reasons why they'll buy, they'll probably tell you why they will not buy. It'll give you a sense of budget, it'll give you a sense of who's the decision maker for whatever product you're selling, and which segments are buying, which are more where the problems are bigger, where the competition is weak, right? So I think having those conversations is important, certainly. And also it's a question of approach. So for example, there are certain products which are to be used only, like every product has to be used, but before somebody can use it, you have to first sell the idea. And in some cases, the product itself is used, and then you kind of go and do the selling later, right? So I think, so one is like more product-led strategy, and other is more,
Right.
So So I think depending on the product type, I mean, some products are catered and created for smaller teams, let's say, right? There, people should be encouraged to use the product, right? And then you obviously make. But if you're selling an enterprise product, then I think a wrong strategy will be to go and let them use the product, because whatever you show, there'll be gaps, like 100%. Why? Because you won't know what an enterprise actually needs unless you have been in an enterprise. Let's say you've been in a VP of sales role for, let's say, an insurance company, so you exactly know the problems. Then it's a different story, right? Then you know what you're creating.
Right.
But other than that, it will be very unlikely that you will have a product which immediately will work in an enterprise category. So there are more conversations, more presentations, letting them speak would help. And then you open your cards and you show the demo or product, whatever the case may be. So I think driving initial conversations in early stage is super critical, and making sure that every conversation is written gives you a huge advantage. It's like you can go back and look at the notes and see what people were saying, right?
Right.
A lot of time people don't do that, and we have been very strict on that in our company. And we make sure that every meeting note is captured, and I get a notification of that note every time somebody puts a note. So I read all those notes. It gives me, it helps me be in touch with the customer, basically, right? What the market is saying, and I can also help the salesperson. So that practice we initially built, and we continue to do so. I think keeping a note of conversations, having those initial conversations, and continue to have those conversations, and you yourself as an entrepreneur should do that. Both the outreaches and also people who are with you, they need to do like new conversations every day, right? I mean, if they're not doing new conversations, then it's a problem. You cannot just sit on one conversation for weeks, right? So, and obviously it depends still on category, because you cannot have 50 conversations in 1 week from enterprises. That's not going to happen, right? But you certainly can have 30 conversations with small and medium businesses in a week. That's still a doable thing. So yeah.
Nice. So, yeah. What is the segmentation approach did you adopt in your initial 25 50 customers?
I think we didn't do a good job early on segmentation, if you ask me. I think we were probably, you can say, less of a strategy, more of being opportunistic to sell to whatever comes by.
Okay.
And I think that may not have been the right thing to do in hindsight if I go back, because it basically builds the product in multiple ways which you may not like, because if you're selling to a certain segment, the fitment to that segment has to be highest. And obviously that was probably, we could have done better if I go back and look. So I think, but what ended up happening was the product did find its own segment, as it turns out, right? Because the way it works is, if salespeople are selling, right, they will always go to the lowest hanging, right? Because they are under pressure to get a deal, and they know if I go to, let's say in case of Lead Squared, education was one of our sweet spot and continues to be. So people knew that if I go and sell to education, people will buy. So the sales reps were selling in that category, and that was one area we continue to win. And so naturally the product got interest in that area. And only after subsequent several years we decided to go. So we kept selling into other segments as well, but education is where the largest mindshare we had. And subsequently we took different steps later on to segment and go after let's say financial services and broadly, and there to be sub-segmented. That insurance is different than lending, and banks are different altogether, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Fantastic. So this is great. So you leveraged Google AdWords to generate inbounds, through their SEM-based marketing strategy, and you augmented it with outbound for a segment that you saw a lot of traction, right? Yeah. So at what time? Two questions. So at what time did you decide to scale your outbound teams and and also enhance your digital presence? I definitely remember seeing a great shift in your organization's outreach, digital outreach activities, when your team started consistently building out great content and digital awareness activities. So when did that strategy come in, and what time, and what are the factors for you to decide to scale that out?
So I'll tell you one thing which we've been doing well, I think, is the whole webinar pieces, right? I mean, I
Right.
think we we wanted to do webinars, and the clear thing was, stated objective was that we have to do it every other week, or there was a cadence we created, and we made sure we did not miss a beat. Starting, I think, 2014 or 13, I don't remember the exact
Right.
date now.
Right.
And so every month, we have been doing, and we've really gotten good at doing those, right? I mean, and that really made sure that people have a great recall for Lead Squad, right? I mean, I think that was one fundamental thing we did. I think the crux was that you should not get bogged down by webinar if there is only one participant coming in, right? And it's funny, but if there only one participant in certain event, we still used to run the full webinar,
Right.
even with one party listening, because that party did not know how many else are there. you know so because you always made, obviously, it didn't happen too many times. I think it was once in a US webinar, and then I think one time in India there were less than 5 people. But we did not get bogged down by that thing, and we continued. And now I think people are hooked about our webinars, right? I mean, I think, and then we started earlier. There was a lot of work we had to do because we had to prepare, we had to present. But then we started inviting guest speakers, and that also helped widen our reach, get
Okay.
new people come in. And also we tried not to be over salesy in our webinars, and it's been mostly a low touch approach on selling, like not aggressive on saying buy Lead Squad and so on and so forth. So I think that also helped us. And I think, so that was one thing which was fundamental to what we continue to even do today. The other thing is, on a marketing side, we could have done a much better in search engine side, but I think that was an area we didn't do that well. I would say, on the SEO standpoint. Obviously, CRM is a tough category. It's hard to rank on those keywords, but we figured out ways to outrank our competition, and create a new for example, way to let people find us on the internet. And
Okay.
then ads, we never stopped ads. But we didn't spend too much on them, right? I mean, I think, because the ROI was not there.
Okay.
Because some of those leads, for example, CRM is such a broad keyword, right? People would type CRM for anything, right? Even if they have and we are focused on sales, so a lot of we had to do a lot of optimization there. And also our key market was India, so we could only spend so much. Given we were not funded, we were very careful in making that spend. But the question on when did we scale outbound, right? I mean, I think we started scaling outbound when we found the right manager. Let me say that.
Okay.
I think that's probably the reason. So earlier I used to run that team myself for several years, and then we started getting people, promoting them. Some people did well, others couldn't scale. And once I found the right person, then the ROI multiplies, because then that person can manage 5-member or 20-member team, right? And that person also knows how to train people quickly. Like within 2 weeks, so we can deploy a sales development rep now, roughly.
Okay.
Within 2 weeks, the guy will be out there and basically making phone calls and all that. So that process, as soon as, and it took us time. I mean, I think we were a small team, less than 8 people in outbound, and obviously it was performing. Some people were not performing. There was a lot of people coming in and out, going in and out, because some people don't like to do that. Whatever. I mean, there are many reasons. But then we've now gotten to a point where we have a decent stability in that team, and basically now we're about 20-25 people, and no problem in scaling that. Like if you want to do double, we can do that tomorrow, basically.
Fantastic. Excellent. So this brings to that point that when you're out there doing selling out marketing automation, and slowly building out and moving towards a multi-product platform. At what point did you start using the software on your within the organization?
Day one.
Day one.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. Day one. I mean, there was because the two things we had our consulting customers, right? So we brought those guys on our platform day one, literally,
Okay.
right? So whatever marketing work we were doing for them, that started happening through Lead Squared, and that was those were like initial, you can say, the test bed for us, our own user and our own use cases and the use cases we were serving for customers.
Okay. Fantastic. This is great. So where did you what was your source of recruitment of your outbound and especially for your outbound team?
Great question. I think I think so a lot has happened in Bangalore in last 5 6 years. Okay, I mean there have been large recruits which have come in and recruited thousands of people, likes of Byju's, who are our customer, and we love them. And many come Flipkarts of the world. Like people have massively recruited. So there's a lot of lateral talent. If you're building a small team, 2 3 4 member team, probably you can find them easily, right?
Okay.
We've also experimented, and we continue to do so now. Is that we go to campuses and we hire freshers from there for internship, and some colleges allow more than 3 months of internship, like a 6 month or something like that.
Right.
So you basically, Manipal is there, SRM is there, VIT is there. If you're looking at South, and if you're looking at Pune, Mumbai, I'm sure there'll be many institutes there as well who would offer something similar. In North, I think Lovely offers a long duration internship, and I think these guys, MET probably also offers, and Sharda in North as well. So I think you can figure out,
Sure.
where you can. But if you go there, you do your basic testing. In fact, one thing which we did, it used to take us 2 days to run the entire drive, and I want to share this with everyone because I think this is going to be great cost savings for you if you do that, and shorten the process as well. So we basically talked to the colleges and said, look, we will do their basic interviews of all the people on the phone and webinar, like Zoom or whatever, right? And only the shortlisted candidates will come and meet. So that brought down our 2-day exercise to 3 hours.
Okay.
Because all we had to really do was finally talk to those 20 people we were supposed to hire. I mean, who have gone through our tests and all that. So we could just go and come back literally in a day, if possible, through air, right? I mean, so that was a huge savings on time and cost also, because otherwise you would end up 4 or 5 people, a lot of paperwork, that all just got sorted basically.
Right. So what kind of aptitudes were you looking on from these college grads?
So I think honestly, I've not still figured out the full secret sauce of it, but I think initially we used to do aptitude test, and we always made people write, and we also did the GD thing earlier.
Okay.
That we have stopped. The GD thing we have stopped now. It was not, because it was a lot of time taking, and that didn't help. So aptitude, certainly we need certain aptitude, right? People have to be able to solve some logic problems and puzzles and all that. But literally the communication is the crux, actually.
It's the crux.
So
right.
Yeah, we make people write emails, for example. We make people, do a sales pitch, for example, and things of that nature. I think that gives us a scenario. We give them a scenario which literally is going to happen in their life, right, in future, and see what. So people who can compose a great email, at the college at their age, right? I mean, when they're freshers, right? I think that tells volumes about what they can, because ultimately it's communication, right? You have to say something in a certain manner, and if you can pick up on that, the thing which is hard to judge is basically their ability to hit the phone, right? And very hard, right? I mean, there's a person, we have hired many people, very vivacious, very outgoing in the interviews, but when you put them on the job, they're probably the one who was a little bit shy. The guy is pulling off like 3 times more work outcome than the guy was very outgoing. So it's actually because sales is hard work, right? I mean, So I think people with that perseverance is very hard to see from outside. I mean, and you don't have tons of time to judge. So you make mistakes, right? But the good thing is, even if you get 50-60% right, I think it's phenomenal if you, because Pareto principle applies, right? The 20% gives the 80% of the result. So if you get half of your recruits correct, you'll still be doing very well, basically.
Fantastic. I'll now come to the to another question. Now you call now the avatar that the Lead Squad has taken is to call yourself as a high velocity sales CRM leader. So what do you define the difference between high velocity and something else?
So look, the classic CRM has many meaning. Service people also call it CRM. Marketing people also call it CRM. Call center also calls it CRM, and sales may also call it CRM. So I think there's a lot of. I think the whole CRM is unbundling right now. The keyword, right? People are saying, "Boss, I don't want a CRM. I want a sales system, or I want service system," and so on and so forth. In context of high velocity, see, if you're selling an enterprise deal, let's say, right, you talk to, let's say, multiple decision makers, right? You would go to the CEO, maybe you go to the head of the department, you'll go to the managers in their department. You try to sell, you go to procurement, you go to finance. You have to sell, if it's a 100K or 200K deal in US dollars, you have to talk to at least 3, 4, 5 people before the deal actually can move forward. And the time is also, it takes a lot of time. There are demonstrations. I'm talking about software. I'm sure it'll be very similar for, let's say, for selling a medical equipment to a hospital. Boss, that sale is going to be months, right? There has to be a budget process. The item has to go in the budget, and so that's, as you can see, by nature of it, it's not high velocity sale, right? It's maybe high ticket sale. In high velocity, the decisions are happening at speed. So, for example, you want to buy an education product, and I believe some of in the audience who have kids, right? You would have bought some or the other, Byju's application or some product, right? Now, if you look at the decision on buying something like a Byju's application or product, is not going to be like 6 months decision, right? We just go and buy, right? And the buying process also has fewer people, fewer touch points, and it happens at speed. So that what I call as high velocity item. So credit card, for example, right? Credit card, like you just take it, right? There is not much thinking going on in taking a credit card. Loan, obviously, you want it. You are the only guy who want the loan. Insurance, unless it's a group insurance or a family insurance, individual insurance is like the same. You go and sell, right? And the duration is few hours to maybe a few weeks. Even real estate is probably it takes more time to close a sale in real estate, right? But it is still not a B2B, right? I mean, people who have to make a purchase, they'll make a purchase in 3 months, right? I mean, less than 3 months.
True.
But the difference in that is the buyers are only 1 or 2 people. I mean, literally, right? The head of the family and the spouse, basically, right? So that's a sale like that. If you're buying a medical product, all these telemedicine products, you are the patient, you basically. So all of these I categorize in high velocity sales segment, because you're at speed. Even things like, if let's say selling an MSME product, right, to a lot of SMEs, the guy is going to decide in like less than 2 weeks. So Lead Squad, when I sell in to smaller businesses, like where there are 5, 10 users, 15 users, right? It's literally high velocity. The guy shows interest. He's talking to 3 people at the same time. He looks at the value proposition. You got to make sure that the sale gets done, and the person who's on the other end is actually the decision maker, literally, in the business owner. So it's, again, I call it, classified as a high velocity sales segment, basically. So save larger B2B deals. These all I would call in sales high velocity, basically.
Okay. So is it fair? So this is bringing a different perspective to the point that typically you associate high velocity to small ticket size, and you're selling in large quantities to a particular segment, either SMBs or mid market, right? Does high velocity sales also work even when it's a high ticket size for enterprises?
So there, I think the difference will be, it may not be as okay. So it definitely can be high velocity in the context of outreach. See, number of people you want to. So that piece is definitely there in enterprise also, because the only time it doesn't work is if you are literally selling to only 15 customers in the market, right?
Right.
Then there are only 15 buyers for your product. Let's say if let's say if somebody's selling a Visa or MasterCard concept to a bank. I mean, literally, there are only 20, 30 banks out there, who has to be sold this idea. You don't want to do any high velocity there. Like that doesn't call for it. But let's say if you're selling an IT management, service management product, or you're selling a sales product to a department, and there are tons of companies. There are thousands of companies who can be a potential buyer.
Right.
And some survey I read somewhere told me that at any given point of time, 15 to 20% of the buying segment is the segment. The 15 to 20% people are in the buying mode in a certain segment, let's say, right? So given that is true, you have to make sure that you are in the radar when the buying opportunity comes up, right? Which means you have to sweep the market, right? You got to talk to as many people as you can in that particular segment or the category. And the outreach can be still high velocity. You can still be touching the same guy once in a month, right? You cannot touch him once every week because they'll get just bored. But at the same time, the account-based selling a little concept can be applied, where you basically have the one person talks to 15 people in the same account, and takes your name to different people, so people are aware of it, right? And you can start mapping, if those guys, who is in favor of yours, right? Who is in favor of the competition, those little things, because those are the outreach is high velocity, but not necessarily the sales or outcome.
Sales process. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Fantastic. This brings me to the to the point where what are some of the key aspects of building a sales organization and measuring a sales organization when you're trying to do high velocity sales? What's been your experience? What are your learnings there? So talk to us about building high velocity sales teams and and making them successful.
Yeah, very hard. I mean, I think there are still people out there who have done a better job than us in that. But I still say the first is obviously getting the right recruitment. So today, if you see, and even in our own company, we are trying to figure out what a sales recruiter looks like, right?
Okay.
So the first is the recruitment piece. So I don't think industry has sales recruitment skills still. I think people have mostly can hire Java.NET developer, and there'll be tons of people who can probably do that. But I don't think recruiters have built that skill,
Right.
especially in the B2B SaaS world, right? I mean, so getting sales recruitment right is in itself a problem area. But let's say assuming somebody solves it, there is somebody who has a better sense of it, right? That's one, so that you get quality candidates in the pipeline, even freshers and senior folks. Then I think once you get person in, I think if people are if people are not proactive and the way to find it is if somebody is not asking questions, right, in sales, which means they're not learning,
Right.
or they're not putting enough effort. If somebody is not asking any questions to you, then that guy is going to take more time to learn, which means your cost of first sale coming out of that investment will be high, right? So the person who's not asking questions is actually a bad recruit, literally. If they don't ask any questions in first 30 days, I think there is no reason why they'll succeed, right? Because nobody, especially in B2B SaaS, if I'm looking, right, there are enough, if you, and the person will ask questions only when he has a conversation with somebody, right? And he cannot answer that question of a customer, right? Then he comes by and say, boss, can you do this in Lead Squared, or can you do this in how do we do this, how do we tackle this business use case? So if that is not coming, then you already have a problem at hand.
Right.
The more it comes, meaning the guy is talking to more and more people, right? And there'll be a point when he will not, after getting fully trained, they will not come to you. Right. Which means you have created a good salesperson then, because now the guy knows how to handle all the questions, he knows how to answer them, he knows how to close a deal, right? So I think that's one method to look at it. And the more, I think this is a management principle rather, not a sales principle per se. But if you check progress every day, progress will happen every day. If you check progress every week, progress will only happen every week. If you check progress once in a month, things will move only once in a month. So because before the call, people will be prepared, right? So I think one thing, if you want to build a solid hunting organization, which I think Lead Squared is very good at, literally, I think then you got to make sure people are driving new conversations every day. Like you have a half an hour call with if it's a small team, right? Half an hour you ask, okay, what are the new conversations you have? I don't want to talk about the old conversation. Just tell me what new people have you touched and what has come out. If you can drive that, then I think sales will follow.
Fantastic.
And the final and the most important piece of any sales puzzle is the sales manager, right? I think getting a great sales manager will make your life so much easier that I cannot even tell you. So VP of sales, obviously the sales manager, literally, but yeah, in your different regions, let's say you have sales managers, because see, sales managers are the ones who are driving the business on day-to-day basis. They're the ones, yeah. So if you have if you figure out the right sales manager, and unfortunately there is no magic bullet to hire the right sales manager. If the guy is really good, he'll show up, right? But most of other people will fall short, because there's a lot of people who want to manage people. Be wary of those guys, because you don't want to manage people. You want to determine the outcome, not manage people. So people who are looking to manage other people are bad hires, because you are not. I mean, any sales organization is not about managing people. It is about managing and determining the outcomes. So I think people who are more passionate about managing people, I think they are maybe wrong hires for running the sales organization. I think getting the right sales manager is is probably, and it's hard. Okay, it's very hard. In fact, most of our sales managers, except maybe few, are all built in Lead Squared.
So, yes, I see that you have a tremendous track record of retention of people and enabling them to grow within the organization.
Yeah. So good salespeople. The other thing which I personally like to do is, if I find a good sales talent, I will not care about bypassing his promotion, even though other people may not like it. Because look, the guy it's Pareto principle. He will he or she will deliver 80% of the outcome. The other 3 people probably will deliver the rest 20%. So even if those 3 guys go, no problem, right? I mean,
right.
I won't say you have to be ruthless about it. You just have to be clear about it, right? People may not like it because in peer group somebody rises, right? There's always this problem that why this guy, he's as good as me. But as a manager or as a person who's leading them, you got to clearly figure out the difference and see why this guy has to be promoted before others. And at every opportunity, I've done that in Lead Squared. I mean, wherever I find a sales talent worthy, I would pull him out and promote him or give him a different assignment, and make sure that because ultimately it benefits the company and the person both.
Got it. So how much of your culture is aligned towards meeting targets at any cost versus versus the thought process of maintaining a healthy pipeline?
So targets are, I think if you drive I think you have to remind people of targets every day. I mean, I think that's very important. And while you do that, the pipeline generation will happen. If they are having new conversations, the deal pipeline will be there, right? I mean, I think, but if they're not talking, then it is a problem. The other thing is, when you are growing, you will see opportunities like, I want to have this as a customer, right? Then the motion is different in those cases, right? So you want to replace somebody. Let's say if you want to get rid of competition in a certain account, right? Then those strategies are little bit differently handled, or should be handled differently, versus the regular regular sales motion. So I think that is what I would say is important, basically. So deal pipeline, if not there, any manager will be unhappy. Right. But if there is, because what happens is, there's a lot of times deal pipeline, but no sales are happening, right?
Right.
And I've seen that in my own company. There have been some months where nothing got done. So you cannot live with that situation, right? Unless the guy has a solid excuse or a reason. Usually the reason is very, very that they've not worked hard. I mean, as simple as that. Because that's the only reason why you would not get sale. Otherwise, you will sell. I mean, I've seen average products selling all over the world, right? I mean, so and right sales attitude will get you, customers in the door. In fact, I'm happy to share that in April we signed up some 25-30 customers.
Fantastic.
Right? Yeah. So one can easily say that what lockdown is there and all that, but we still got the sales done. We are selling in May also. So it doesn't matter. We got to sell, basically.
Correct. Right.
I mean, if the market where you were selling is not buying, then you find the market which is buying, which is what I asked everybody, right? Who is buying, right? So it's also for me to learn who is buying, and then we go and sell to them. I spoke to a banker and I said, "Whom are you giving still loans?" Right? And she told me two different segments, which means those guys still have money, right? If banker is giving a loan to them, you can go and sell to them.
Right.
So identifying who's buying is very, very important. So anyway, yeah.
Fantastic. After several years of focusing on the India market, I think in the last couple of years you started to really expand uh, from a major culture shift within the organization. You also raised funds recently. You also started expanding, to South Asian markets. So talk to us a little bit about the difference between, having a sales team that sells in India and now you're, changing directions from an expansion and moving to other markets. How did this team transition? You retained the same team, gave them new geographies, or you brought in new talent to handle new geographies? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I had mixed experience there. So I think moving existing talent is always the right thing to do. Getting a new talent is very hard to make it work. Even for getting a Mumbai up and running, I had to send somebody from Bangalore.
Okay.
Because I had actually failed 3 times. I had 3 people to lead that, and all 3 didn't work out, right?
Right.
So I think having your trusted folks go into new geography always helps. What I've come to now, I didn't see in hindsight I should have done it better. But I think there is always a point in time when you want to work and expand through partners, because some of these geographies, right? Like for example, you take Vietnam, Indonesia, or Dubai, or any outside geography. A lot of these places buy from because of relationships. And look, you go there new, right? I mean, nobody knows you, so forget it. You are not going to get any deal, right?
Right.
I think building right partners is going to be an important piece of the puzzle, and you can do it much before. I mean, we could have done it at least 2 years before, maybe not 2, but at least. So we started that motion last year only, mid of last year, when we had a full team and all that. We were doing tidbit here and there, but we have now a focused approach, a 4-member channel team, just focusing on building partners and business through them. So that is a right approach. So you can have, because if you go travel, stay there for a week or 2, that's still okay. But the idea is that you actually build a partner who can represent you. It's like you have somebody who's taking your flag in that geography, right?
Right.
I was a little bit hesitant to sign up partners earlier, and also because some of these geographies require localization for the product, and obviously we were not ready, and so that didn't work out. Then also expanding other markets, for example, we got we didn't do very well in some areas because the data laws, privacy laws were different. The hosting data center was not there in certain geography, right? In Dubai, for example, AWS, where the product is hosted, was not there. Okay. So you couldn't win certain accounts. Then it's half-hearted, right? I mean, you spend money, but you're not able to sell into some area. So I think on a strategy level, also one can do a little bit better understanding, saying if people are not going to buy, then which segment is going to buy, right? And if that segment is large enough, right? And only then you can decide. And the partners can guide in that process well, versus you spending a lot of money doing it. And we have actually done it. So now we have learned some lessons in that process, certainly. But now I would aggressively work with partners, right? And depending on which size and scale the company is, I think, on the product maturity is, I think going through partners is a great strategy, actually, if you're going into new markets.
Fantastic. Great. Let me come to you from what you see on the on the ecosystem point of view. So why? So you had some sales background when when during Proteans, right? You come from a tech background and you transitioned into sales skills pretty much later on. So today, why there are a lot of tech entrepreneurs who come with great product skills or technology skills, but kind of hesitate and have challenges in taking on the sales mantle, right? So what advice and lessons you would share with them, as to why sales is a very critical skill for a founder to have, that goes a long way in building the company.
So look, I mean, I think people are different, right? So somebody is good at something, may not necessarily be good at selling, let's say, right? So I think it's a question of if you a liking of it, or liking of not doing something is very ingrained into human nature, right? So but at least you have to tell your own story. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to do selling, some amount of selling an idea to a VC, for example, selling the first product. I mean, all of that is required, and that's what because people, when you sell, the people who follow you in your team would have would like it, basically, right? Let's say if you are not outgoing sales guy, you'll still have to do the first few deals, right? You got to demonstrate the product if it's a SaaS product, let's say, and then you get the sales managers, like you hire somebody to do that, right? I mean, but important thing is it has to be done. I mean, either you do it day in and day out, because selling is a full-time job, right? It is not I'll write code in the evening and in the morning only I will sell half day, and it will not, because sales is prospecting is like a activity. It has to be done day in and day out. I mean, I still prospect, right? I would write notes on LinkedIn to people still today. I mean, that's just the thing you do, right? That's what you got to talk to people every so often. So I think as a founder, highly encourage you to reach out, talk to people, write to them directly, etc. But let's say if the time doesn't permit for whatever reason, right? For the reason of the product, etc. Then you basically get somebody else to drive that motion, basically.
Fantastic. Great, Nilesh. Great conversations. I think I'll open up the floor for questions to come up.
Yeah, I hope people are not bored.
Yeah. So you can either raise your hand or you can type in your question from the audience. You can use the questions window. How did you get?
How to get first 10 customers?
Yeah, how did you get your first 10 customers?
I think we had 12 customers, I think, for our marketing services, so that we started billing them. So for us, it was easy because it was a captive audience, right? But assuming you start day zero, you have no customers, then you basically go and give a pilot free or something. I mean, you got to figure it out, but depending on the product types. For example, I'm talking to somebody who has a certain product for a lending institution, right? So he reached out to those 15 people in that segment, and 2 of them agreed to do a pilot with him, for example. So you talk to the universe, who is the buyer. If you have a generic product, which is, I would say generic meaning more for SMB world, and more let's say collaboration software, whatever, right?
Right.
I think you then generate lead and then try as hell as possible to convert them into a paying customer, or some sort of a user in online sales or whatever, right? So getting leads is the first thing. So depending on the business, if it's a niche, you basically go and talk to them directly. If it's more generic offering, like a ticketing product, then you do internet-based marketing largely and get the deals in. But see, everybody knows at least 15-20 people. Okay, look, you got to look at your own LinkedIn network. You got to look at, ask your friends. I mean, people will buy, right? I mean, they will help you. If they have known you, they will help you. So any method, you use. You get the first customer. Let's say the guy is not buying from you. Then you ask him who else can buy in your friend list. It's a classic sales momentum method only. The guy who's not buying, say, no problem, you don't buy. But tell me other 2 people in your who are good friends. So you're basically building a relationship at that point, right? I mean, I think
right.
If you build a relationship, people will open doors for you. I mean, not that hard.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nilesh. Next is I'm bringing Yi Han.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, hi, Mr. Han.
Okay. Hi. Hi, Bimlash. Hi, Nilash. Thanks for the presentation. My name is Yi, and I work in the Bay Area, and I work in venture capital, and have attended a lot of Bay Area events focused on sales. I was wondering what kind of differences you see when it comes to sales enablement in India versus in the US market.
So I think the buyer, we have to look from the buyer standpoint. Say Americans buy in a certain way, right? I mean, and Indians buy in a certain method. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's probably the difference, and everything revolves around that. So, for example, if I look back 3-4 years ago, or even before lockdown, right? Even small to mid-size, so we sell to colleges, let's say, right? So, college, the owners of the college want to meet you. I mean, there is no way around it, right? They got to meet you before they make a purchase decision.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a given in some cases. But a lot of young companies today in India would just buy on phone, right? So then the market segment which is there, which buys on phone, would be of that nature. But if you ask, that's a fundamental difference. A lot of people want to meet before they make a purchase decision in India is certainly a reality, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
now obviously with post-COVID things are a bit different. And look, in post-COVID, people would may not directly buy from you. The small, medium businesses, even large businesses who are tech focused, can still buy online, no problem. But a bank would never buy online. I mean, or lending institutions would not. Like an insurance guy wouldn't just buy online, right? Unless they know you from past,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is one difference in selling into. And US, the other good thing is the US buyers are usually upfront and straight. Like, look, they'll say, if I have a budget, they'll tell you, right? They'll not
Mm-hmm.
waste your time largely, right? They will not, go round and round. And a good sales guy will figure it out. But in Indian context, sometimes people are not good at saying no,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Just the way I think the social context is, people just don't say flat no to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then you don't. So you have to be a smart guy to sales guy to figure out whether he's buying or just he wants to buy or he just won't buy, right? And something like that. So I think that is again which actually you are able to judge more on by meeting them, right? Because you can then look at facial expressions and talk to people, understand the seriousness, whether they
Mm-hmm.
really want to pursue. So I think if I think these are the two I would say main major differences, because I've sold in US and here as well. Is what I can see in US also. What I've observed in certain categories of the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
They people would unless you go, so you go to their event. Let's say it's a pharma event, let's say, and people are in pharma. You're selling to pharma businesses. So if you go to pharma event, they meet you, they greet you, they have a drink with you at the bar in the evening. I think then they'll get soften up and buy. And I've seen that as well for certain segments. So not that all segments in US would just buy on phone. Like colleges, if you sell in US, I mean, forget it. Like they're not buying on phone, right? So things like that, yeah.
I'll just add to that, Nilesh. I think what I've also seen, there's a big difference in the way the outreach happens. US is very comfortable when you have multiple touch point outreach. Like, for example, India doesn't have a culture of voicemail, right? But
Yeah.
when you're selling to US, your SDR teams need to have a very strong skill on how do they leave those voice messages so that the customer is enticed to call you back,
Mm-hmm.
right? Many of them are very clear in, even with email campaigns, the the outreach person whom you're trying to reach out would not appreciate to get a direct cold call from you before getting an email,
Mm-hmm.
right? So these are some of the small differences between outreaching customers in the US versus folks in India.
Thanks very much.
Sure. Thank you. The next question is from Naveen Lingaya. He has a question. And any tips on price negotiations?
Great question.
You have any tips to put in place?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of them actually. So I think firstly, see if you're early stage, right? You want the customer. So I think price is not that critical, and the guy knows that he has a leverage on you. So unless there's a solid relationship and the guy really has a solid need, it's unlikely that they'll pay you, any better. Like they'll just drop at the price, right? So I think so that in that case, I think the leverage is very little in the hands of the entrepreneur, right? But let's say if you're running a motion already, you're selling, right? I think you don't. I mean, depending on where you are in the life of the product, right? In terms of maturity, in terms of the market share, whatever. I think the pricing is largely determined by the competition at large, right? In some areas. So if, you have, depending on the product type, right? You can basically not. So for example, let's say now COVID time, right? Some of my competition is offering 2 months, 3 months free. I still don't offer 3 months free, right? I mean, why? Because there is a certain category of customer who I know would my product will better fit. I would not be willing to leave that money on the table, for example, right?
Right.
Because that customer would be benefit only they use Lead Squared and not any other product. So I think that determination is tough to come by. It takes years before you can be sure about it. But I think on pricing, it is always first lesson I've learned on pricing is don't quote an outlandish price, right? Especially when the market is not going to buy at that price. I think that makes it difficult because sometimes people will not even come to you, or they will not even respond to your email after that. So I think that that has to be. Website can still have an outlandish price. That's okay, but in sales conversations you cannot quote that price and still hope to win the deal, unless you have a super differentiated product, right? I mean, I think every product will have a competition, so you have to be really careful on that. But don't quote too low. I mean, that because you don't make money, right? I mean, so ultimately you have to take care of your gross margins, right? So you have to hit 80% gross margin, 90% gross margin. So accordingly you price. Some deals will be lower on gross margin, fine, but others have to make up for that.
All right.
So I mean, the trick is you have to figure out the segment. So I'll give another example. So for example, if I go and sell to travel agent, right? The guy makes a small commission on the travel e-books. He cannot pay you a lot of money. Like, forget it, right? So, but if you, let's say, go to the hotel, for example, or large resort, right, or like an Orange County or somebody, right? Now they can afford, right? I mean, they can afford to pay you well. So I think the customer segment will also determine whether they can pay you a lot or not, basically.
Sure. I have a small addition to make here. What I've seen work well is, before you get into price negotiations, ensure that all your objections, are all taken care of. That the customer is very clear that this is the right fit that he wants to, talk to you about. And price negotiation, in my view, has to be looked at from a win-win, right? If you're being very tightly pressed on the current tenure of your pricing, say you're trying to do an annual contract of your SaaS product, or of your current product offering, before you offer any discounts, is there something that you want to explore with the customer? That is he looking for a 1-year contract, or is he open to look at a multi-year contract as well? Ask him a lot of factors so that you have the levers to push around. That, okay, if I give you a less discounted price, can you extend my tenure of your contract, or can you take on priority one service agreement as well? So explore all these options before you understand what levers of pricing you really want to negotiate on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you nailed it. You rightly said. I think unless we know why they'll buy, I mean, that just assume that's out of the way before you enter the price discussion.
Right.
But if it's a well understood product, let's say if you're selling an invoicing product, and I'm just like everybody, the customer is expecting certain thing, so the offering is so clear, right, that then you can directly show the product and quote the price, right? I mean, because in high velocity environment, let's say we're selling a lot of it, you won't get a lot of time to debate also.
Correct.
So depending on the category, you have to react. So otherwise you may lose the sale, basically.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks, Naveen. Next question is from Suresh Singh. How important are relationships or keeping conversations on, especially in current times when sales are not happening? And how do you do it?
I think you will find ways to talk to people. I mean, I think, and look, if the other guy also feels that there is value in what you're offering, they will also respect and give you some time, right? But one thing which I've learned, is that being a sales guy, sometimes you're hyper, right? You want to talk to uh, you want to outreach the CEO every week or the buyer every other week. See, they have other priorities also. So you have to figure out whether the deal timing is going to be immediate or not. I mean, that's a hard one actually. And I have a great sales guy in my company who I'm also learning from on what would be the timing of the deal, right? So, for example, we are able to say, well, is this the right time to strike, or we should we should not spend bug this guy too much, right? So, I spoke to one guy, for example, yesterday, right, and I've known him for a while, but I spoke to him exactly 4 to 5 weeks ago, and I promised him I'll call him in a week. I didn't because I figured that was not the right time to call. And then I asked him to, and then I figured through my other background work that there is no deal happening in next 4 weeks, right? But now I spoke to him yesterday because I know that now it is moving towards the closure time, let's say. So June might the decision will come. So I think keeping that it also in mind is important, because if the guy is not going to do a deal in next 3 months, then calling him every month is also of not much value, right? I mean, you can still keep relationship by saying hello on email, but you don't have to ask their time, right? I mean, what will you discuss in that?
Got it. Cool. Next question is from Alpana Sharma. How is B2B sales in US market different than India?
I think it is very different. Very different actually. US has I think first of all, as I said earlier, right, if they have budget, they'll entertain you, or so they're very clear in a lot of areas from a buying standpoint. I mean, they'll not waste your time, right? All of that. So that piece is clear, and if you persist enough, they will give you time also. I've also observed that not everybody, but largely people give time as well. Because I remember in Protean's days, right? I got a meeting with it's a funny meeting. I'm happy to share. He was VP of IT at Home Depot. Home Depot is obviously a large retailer, right? Of home wares. We persisted. He gave me a meeting. I went there and I did not have much to offer him because we were a small services company, about 100, 200 people. And he said, look, if you have anything which solves my problem, I'm happy to take you guys in. Otherwise, I'm working with some of these large vendors where there are thousands of people who work for me in different companies. So look, you got the meeting, but then I did not have a good story to tell him, because what I had was not enough for him to, but the fact that he appreciated the follow-up, he gave the meeting. So you will get the meeting, right? That is possible, and that will happen in India also, by the way. So in that, but the good thing is they will tell you upfront whether there is a opportunity for you, and even they may even tell you the problem where they have a problem, so that if you solve that problem, they can maybe take you in there. So to that extent, they'll be very, very forthcoming in US. But I think what I'm not sure now is 100% sure now is a lot of outreaches are happening, right? All these sales tools have made it super easy for people to send emails and make conversations. So I think standing out because Indian CEOs would not be getting as many emails as the US CEOs are getting today. So to that extent, you have to stand out in that context. So I think LinkedIn may be a great way to get an answer. There's one of the many ways to get an answer, right? So yes, I think the buyer is more mature. Buyer will be more straightforward in US, and if your offering is clear and differentiated in their eyes, you will get a better chance to succeed in US than in India.
Fantastic. Thanks, English. I think we'll take the last question. This is from Santosh Shukla. Could you please talk about the journey from services to product? At what point did you decide to do that?
So we, as I said earlier, right? I mean, the objective was very clear from day one. It has to be a IP-led, software product-led model. The earlier days of service were more to help the basically get some cash in, right? So you offer services, you make a little money on that by doing so. Understand the use case. We were also clear about sales and marketing as a broader area. We experimented with one more idea, but broader area was going to be sales and marketing. So that helped us pick some use cases also. And because we had clarity in what we wanted to do, we ended up doing that. I mean, so it was one thing I would say definitely was interesting learning. All people who were in services may not be the right people to be part of the product business. So that churning may need to happen at some point. Everybody wasn't, because services may, in some cases, you may have skills which are not needed when you build the product, for example, right? Or after you start selling the product. So I think that piece it was one of the things I learned. But other than that, for us, it was very clear that it will be. And one thing also which we decided was, once the product was out, right? Within 3 months or I think 6 months, I don't remember the exact timeline. We decided to not take within 3 months. We decided not to take any new engagements and services, right? And we were discouraging existing customers to grow with us. So, which means that we didn't say no to people saying go away, but it was clear that it was a natural death of that business. Right. And it happened within 6 to 8 months. Everything vanished to zero.
Fantastic. I think we have come to the end of questions. Nilesh, thank you so much. Thanks to the audience as well. Very insightful questions. Nilesh, wonderful conversation. Great takeaways. Thank you so much for spending time with us on Pitch Camp today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Bimlesh. I'm glad we met after a long time here, even though online.
Right.
And I'm glad you're doing a fantastic job of putting together material and information for the sales context. Really, really helpful for people. So, and thank you so much for inviting me. Sure. I'm happy to be around. We can do another one later whenever the time is right. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for being a patient listener.
Yeah.